Okay, with defense research, there's a lot of flaws in defense research. It's not that we don't have data, it's that we use it the wrong way. Tend to cherry pick it, tend to use data and apply data where it shouldn't be applied, stuff like that. And that's why if you ever hear somebody say research says or studies show, stuff like that, that you have to take that with, I think the word is a grain of salt, they say, or something like that. So my topic here is how many shots fired in a gunfight versus how many shots needed in a gunfight. And the key term we're looking at here is how many are needed. And then here is the list that for data, some of these we can't count for data and some we can. So I have a no and a yes right here. And then here it is right here for research. Okay. Pray and spray. When somebody prays and sprays, they waste ammo. So we don't want to count that because that shows that they're not trained because it's intentional. So I wrote that down here. This is intentional type of pray and spray. Law enforcement, unnecessary engagements. We don't want to include law enforcement because we're trying to find out what the private citizen needs, not law enforcement. Because law enforcement, they have extra engagements where they have to go chase a suspect, whereas you and I don't have to chase a suspect. Gangs, we don't want to count them because they're just slinging ammo all over the place. So if you count the rounds that are fired with gangs, that doesn't represent a decent law-abiding citizen that wouldn't normally waste ammo and spray it all over the place. Military, we can't count them either. Unnecessary engagements, we're not shooting and shooting and shooting constantly like the military is, going house to house and stuff like that. A private citizen doesn't do that. So citizen without training, we don't want to count them either because they're not trained. Everybody should have training. So a citizen without training, we want to count that as poor shot placement. So we don't want to count their ammo in the gunfight because that does not represent us that train and people that at least dedicate one day a week or something in their training and not just let the gun, collect dust on their nightstand or whatever. Citizen with training, we do want to count that because a citizen that's trained will show us if our training schools and our firearms teachers, this is going to show us that this training works based on what? Based on the person had good shot placements. They didn't waste their ammo, but they applied the principles of marksmanship and they practiced their draws. They have good speed, good accuracy. So we want to know any shooting school that has students that have been trained or people that just train by themselves, like at a gun range, and they've gotten to a point where they're proficient. Okay, playing cop and chase. These are people that want to chase a suspect. This requires more ammunition, okay? So we don't want to count that. That's unnecessary ammo. If a couple guys run away and they go in a car, you don't jump in a car and go chase them, okay? That's up to the police. So that ammunition that you fire, we don't want to count that at all. Sheepdog, same thing. Unnecessary engagement. Now, even though sheepdog and playing the cop is extremely rare, we don't want to count this ammunition here as far as how many shots needed to be fired in a gunfight. So the sheepdog right here is unnecessary engagement. So what he's going to do is he's going to play the police, and same thing, he's going to go after the bad guys if they jump in a car, and he's going to go shoot it out with them and stuff like that. Okay, shooting while running. This is a bad guy. For instance, you fire a shot and three guys take off down the alley and they're running, and then you try to shoot them in the back. We don't want to count that ammunition because that's kind of like praying and spraying, so that's wasted ammo. If you've broken contact with that person or them suspects, three of them are attackers, whatever you want to call them, and they run away from you, is it necessary to shoot in a direction where you can hit other people and bystanders and stuff like that, shooting at long range and stuff like that? So you want to let them run, you want to let them go and let law enforcement take care of it. We don't want to count that in the data. Breaking contact shots, we want to count that. That's a citizen that fires one shot. let's say they fire one shot and there's three bad guys and they all take off, we want to count that shot as working in that defense situation. So yes, we want to count that. Why? Because the ammo was used wisely. They fired one shot and they were ready to shoot at, let's say there's three people, three attackers, and all they needed was one shot, and then they stopped. Okay, that's ammo used wisely. Okay, this one here is adrenaline dump, pray and spray. Excuse the dogs, by the way. Adrenaline dump, pray and spray. This would be wasted ammo right here. And this is based off adrenaline. And it's sad that we don't know how we're going to respond in situations because everybody responds differently. But they say that you revert back to your training, so make sure you get training. Because that adrenaline dump will probably make you fight instead of flee or freeze in your tracks. Bad citizens, non-gang members, these are like single attackers, like somebody that's a single attacker, like a robber or something, for instance, and more shots than necessary, he's going to spray ammo all over the place. Okay, in this section right here, what I have is most likely, probability right here, least likely, possibility. Okay, now this is kind of like a bar graph. This is the high part right here, which means it's most likely, and this is the low part right here, which means least likely. So if this was on a graph, this would be higher, this would be lower. So on here, on most likely, you'll find out that in engagements with private citizens, no shots are even fired. They just see the muzzle of the gun. One shot they run. We see this is most likely too. One shot, maybe missed or something, they all take off. One shot and hit, they run. Okay, let's say that 1 out of 3 guys got hit. The rest of them, or all 3 of them, take off. 3 shots and they run. Okay, so you fire 3 shots, whether you connect with them shots or not, all 3 of them guys, they take off on you. 6 shots, 2 each for 3 attackers. Okay, so that's 2, 4, 6, 2 on each person. That's least likely because of the fact that most defense situations there's no shots fired at all, or there's one shot that's fired that either hits or misses and they all take off. So what we want to do is we want to base research on probability, not possibility. We want to base research on most likely and not least likely, because this here is a black swan. Now, should we be aware of this? Yes. But what I'm saying is that the odds of this happening in this area are less likely than over here, because thousands and thousands of defense situations are over on this side right here. And this is private citizens. We're not talking about military and law enforcement. A lot of people like to work that into the data, and that screws up the good research. So down here, there's a couple points I want to make. Why are so few shots needed in a gunfight? Now, I'm not going to tell you whether it's 3, 6, or 5 or whatever, but what I am going to tell you is that gunfights with private citizens is only a few seconds. You run out of ammo before you run out of time. Okay, what that is something like this. A shot is fired and the gunfight happens so quickly that the guys take off on you. Most gunfights are like that. They only last a few seconds and it's over with really quickly, which means you don't necessarily have to have a lot of ammunition. That's why revolvers and stuff do fine. And they found out that for every person that lost a gunfight with a revolver, they can find just as many that lost a gunfight with a semi-auto. So you can't bash revolvers without getting your data right. Okay, so you run out of ammo before time, okay? And what does that mean? That means something like John Correa discovered in his research. No mag change because the perps run and the gunfight is so quick that a lot of people don't even have time to change a magazine. Do we need to practice mag changes? Well, sure we do. But the studies and the research that he did on his channel, and I'm glad he did it, John Correa, is active self-defense or whatever, is the fact that he found out in his videos and his research that it's very, very rare or almost non-existent that a decent law-abiding citizen that has training does not have to have a reload, a magazine reload, and this includes probably a small firearm or even a revolver. So knowing that, what it tells you is that these gunfights happen so quickly among private citizens. That's one of the reasons why you don't need a lot of shots. Am I saying you should carry a 2-shot Derringer? No. Am I saying you should carry 2,000 rounds? Well, that's a little excessive. Where are you going to put the rounds? You know what I'm saying? So what we want to do is we want to make sure in the research that we stay away from military, gangs, and law enforcement, because this is going to screw up the research and make the shots, how many shots fired in a gunfight, a lot higher than it needs to be, because we're not interested in law enforcement, gangs, and military. What we're interested is a trained private citizen right here. We're interested in only them, because each person every day is going out, whether they're concealed or open carry, and they are responsible for that training so that they can defend themselves and stuff like that. So basically what I'm trying to get home to you guys is this. Even if we have the data, okay, even if we have the data, we have to be careful that we analyze the data properly to conduct proper research. And there's nobody on the internet that has challenged this except for me. I've gone to great lengths to challenge and analyze what we're getting from data, and I found out that it's flawed. It's really flawed, because when you throw in law enforcement, gangs, and military, what they'll do is they'll take them numbers of shots that were fired, and what they'll do is they'll lump them in with the private citizen. We don't want that. We want to know the private citizen and what their self-defense shots were. We don't want to know anything about law enforcement, gangs, and military. That is totally separate. Law enforcement has their own separate thing going on. We want to keep that separate from the private citizen because the roles are different. Law enforcement, once again, has to chase. They have to go to the suspect. What does that mean? That means after one gunfight, they're not done yet. They got to get in the car, chase the guy, shoot some more rounds. What does that mean? That means more resources, okay? And among them, more resources, you need body armor, you need AR-15, you need dogs, you need all kinds of resources that the private citizen like you and me just going down to the store to get a gallon of milk doesn't need. Now, can trouble find us? Sure. But we can avoid trouble a lot more than law enforcement and military and gangs because we're not involved in that. We're breaking contact. These guys are not breaking contact. They're not breaking contact. They're continuing contact, which means more resources, more ammunition, stuff like that. That's why a lot of gangs, you'll see them with 30-round sticks, 30-round mags and stuff with their Glocks. Why? Because they're laying down a lot of volume, because they might have 8-10 guys shooting at them at the same time, back and forth. But we don't want to count gangs. We don't want to count law enforcement or military. We don't want to count all of these here, because that's going to corrupt our research. So, and a small exception might be a sheepdog or somebody playing cop or something, maybe a couple extra rounds, but still, we don't want to count that. Why? Because it's not their duty to do that. They don't have to do it. Now, they might do it, okay? But we want to know what the private citizen needs in a defense situation. We don't want to know what a private citizen needs when they are starting to play cop or they're going to be a sheepdog, because being a sheepdog is extremely rare. You notice, like in the Indiana Mall, that one guy took 10 shots, okay? That's extremely rare among private citizens. Should we try them 10 shots and make sure we're on target at long range? Sure. But that's a black swan event. Doesn't happen that often, okay? And he was a private citizen that acted like a sheepdog, and he went after the guy. And most of us would have done the same thing in his situation if we saw what was happening and we were the only ones that were armed in that situation. We'd probably do the same thing. But still, that's extremely rare. So we don't want to count the ammunition from that. because that's right here, least likely. Very, very, very least likely for something like that to happen. Most of the engagements are maybe at the most, 2 people, maybe 3. It's kind of hard to debate that. But the thing we have to understand is in order to get proper data, we have to put everything into context. And a lot of times things are not put into context because everybody's listening to law enforcement, and law enforcement is not right about everything that they say they're right about. So you don't want to always trust law enforcement. You don't want to always trust the military for your information because we're private citizens. We're not talking about military. We're not talking about gangs. We're not talking about law enforcement. But anyway, thank you very much for watching.